So for this dish, this was my inspiration was zucchinis, because everybody in the summertime, if you have your own garden, you probably have too many zucchinis. So this is going to be a no-cook curried peanut zoodles recipe, and the zoodles are going to be based on zucchini, because that term comes from zucchini, noodles is zoodles. So the way you make zoodles, in case you want to do, it's like a pasta dish but without the pasta, the way you do it is you use a spiralizer. So there are different types of spiralizers you can get. This is the super easy version, you know, the $10 type version that you can find at pretty much any cookware store like Bed Bath & Beyond, or you can order it online. But there's also a really, really fancy version of a spiralizer, which I also have that, but it actually bolts to the counter and it has multiple ways that you can spiralize things. The advantage of this tiny one is that it's incredibly inexpensive and very portable, and it's great for doing zucchini. The disadvantage of this is that you can only really do zucchini with it. The advantage of the bolt on the counter, really fancy kind that probably costs over $100, but the advantage of that one is that you can basically spiralize almost anything. You can spiralize a really fat carrot would work, or you can do butternut squash, you can spiralize it, you can spiralize apple. I mean, really anything that you can fit the spiral blade into on one of the clamp-on types, you can spiralize. But again, this is really only good for zucchini. But that's my favorite thing to spiralize. So I'm going to show you how to do it. So you have a stem end and you have a blossom end on a zucchini. The blossom end is the one that's not round. It's kind of the biggish one. And that's where originally when the plant grew, here's the stem. It grew out of the stem, and then the flower came out, which was here, and then the fruit developed. And as the fruit developed, then the flower hangs onto the end and then it falls off. So this is the flower end and this is the stem end. It's very important to know which one you're looking at. So you want to cut off the flower end, and that will become important because this little spiralizer has a thinner kind of zoodling thing and a thicker one. So there's two options here. I'm going to do the thinner one, but you could do the thicker one to make thicker noodles. But the reason you want to cut off the flower end is because as you spiralize, you just twist it and push it in. And once in a while I like to break it off because you could conceivably spiralize an entire zucchini, but that would be one really long strand and that would be kind of hard to eat, frankly. So I just pull it out once in a while just to break it up. Other people break it up with their hands afterwards, and that's fine too. I just think it's easier to just once in a while break it this way. But you can see that it looks like it's still connected, but it isn't, which I'll show you after I finish spiralizing this. But it makes this really interesting shape as you're going in there. So it makes kind of a point. And again, now you'll notice that you have to start being careful when you get more of it spiralized, because as you can see, my hand's getting closer to the blades. And you do not want to cut yourself. These blades are very sharp. I have cut myself. It's not fun. So when you get kind of perilously close to the blades, as I almost am, then what you want to do is, in case you're wondering what's this other piece of it, these pointy things, you ram it into the end, and then you use that to push it, thus saving your hands. And the reason that you want to cut off the flower end first and put flower end in is because if you try to stick this piece into this piece, it'll splinter apart. It works better, I have found out the hard way, it works better if you stick the pointy part into the stem end. And you'll know it's done when I can't go any farther. So that's it. And then you're left with this really cute little interesting nubbin thing. And you can, if you want to, you can just slice off that little stem end and you can just include that in there, or you can save it and you can put it on top as a cute little garnish at the end. So that's how and then you can kind of separate it with your hands a little bit. Make sure that you have separate strands. So see, it's very, very pasta-like. And if you do the thicker choice, like I said, there's two choices on my spiralizer. If you do the thicker choice, then it'll be a little bit more like tagliatelle or fettuccine. This is a little bit more like regular kind of pasta thickness. So that's the spiralized part. And then for the carrots, a lot of people think carrots are all orange. They are not. Carrots come in a lot of different colors. I really like these maroon carrots. That's my favorite color of carrot. So I just think it's really pretty So I thought I would get, and the interesting thing about this is it's actually yellow inside, so it's a really interesting color scheme. So I did get organic carrots because, as I said previously in the other segment, I don't always buy everything organic, but I feel like if I'm going to eat the peel, and if it's something that's grown completely in the ground for its entire life, such as root vegetables are, see again, isn't that neat? It's a very cool color. Then I think it's worth buying it organic. So that's what I do. So I do get organic carrots, and I do not peel them, which is another reason I like to get them organic, because then I don't need to peel them. Because as I said before, in the other segment, a lot of the nutrients in produce are actually right underneath the skin, and so if you peel them, you do actually lose quite a lot of nutrients. So I'd prefer not to do that. So I'm just cutting these into thin little pieces. We call them matchsticks. Then I'm just going to kind of make them not exactly bite-sized, but, you know, smallish pieces. I don't want any huge. I don't want them to be so big that it's distracting. You bite down and all you get is carrot. So I'm just going to do them kind of chopped. So that is going to be the maroon carrot. And you can do different colors of carrots to create a different effect, of course. But since these have maroon and yellow in them, it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal. But I am going to add a little bit of the orange, just for the color change. The interesting reason that people think that carrots are always supposed to be orange is because centuries ago, carrots were a really big export from Holland, and the royal color of Holland is orange, which is why it was called the House of Orange. And that is why, and of course, you know, in homage to that, they preferred orange carrots. So it kind of actually started as more of a one country's particular liking for a certain color carrot as a result of their royalty, and it just kind of stuck as being kind of a standard color for carrots. But the original wild carrots were probably more like that maroon color. They probably were not orange. But orange is very pretty, of course, so I, for one, am very glad that we have orange carrots. So we're going to have this little color contrast here with the maroon carrots and the orange carrots. Oh, one thing I did want to point out about carrots is if you buy carrots that still have the greens attached, immediately rip them off. They are edible and they are wonderful to eat. And actually they're similar to parsley. Carrot greens are very similar to parsley. But the problem is that if a root plant such as a carrot or a beet still has its greens attached to it, it's still growing. It's still trying to grow. So what happens is the plant is going to put all its energy into the greens. So if you leave the carrot greens attached to the carrot, you can see I immediately cut them off because these had greens about this big. But if you leave it on, what's going to happen is the green is going to keep growing and growing and growing, and it's going to suck all the nutrients out of the root so that the greens keep going. So you wind up with a shriveled, non-crispy, kind of sad-looking carrot. But you have really healthy greens, so I guess it depends. If you really want the greens, you can leave it attached to the carrot. But if you would like both to be a bit more optimal, what you can do is you can chop off the greens and then put them in treat them like cut flowers. Put them in a nice glass of water or a vase even. And then that way the greens can keep hydrating themselves from the water so they can keep being nice and crisp. And especially if you tint them and refrigerate them, which this trick, that also works really well with cilantro, which we're going to be using. Anything that still has a stem attached to it, whether it's an herb or whether it's the carrot tops or the beet tops. If you just treat it like a cut flower, tint it, and put it in your refrigerator, it actually stays nice and crisp for quite some time, like a good week. I have found with cilantro I can keep it for a week or even more that way. So that's a tip for the carrot greens though. If you want to keep them, you can keep them, but don't leave them attached to the carrots. So this is a bell pepper. This is a red bell pepper that we're going to use also. And I'm going to make this more of a minced, I'd say actually diced kind of size. And the green bell pepper, the yellow bell pepper, the orange bell pepper, and the red bell pepper are all the same plant at different stages of maturity. So they're the exact same plant. And so if you grow them yourself in your garden, you'll see that. And if you didn't realize that, it's going to be a bit of a surprise because, again, it starts with green, shades to yellow, shades to orange, shades to red. As it shades through those colors, it gets sweeter. So that's why green peppers have kind of a little bit of a bitterness to them. They're definitely not sweet, and they're not called sweet peppers either. Whereas orange is a little bit sweeter, yellow is sweeter, and then red is the sweetest, and that's why people call them sweet peppers, sweet bell peppers. And sometimes in the market, if you don't grow them and you get them in the market, you'll see that it kind of has a patch of green on it. It's not entirely solid red, and that's why, because it was picked before it was entirely ripe, which I actually like that. So sometimes I purposely look for peppers that are not quite all the way ripe, that still have a little bit of green or yellow or orange in them. I think it's pretty. So some even get as dark as like a purplish color. But my problem when I grow them in the garden is the squirrels get them. And so I have trouble getting it to get all the way mature to be a nice red, because it takes a long time to shade from green to yellow to orange to red. And in that time, the squirrel gets it. So I kind of gave up trying to actually get red bell peppers in my garden, because I can't outcompete the wildlife. But, you know, good for them. So we're also going to add some peas. So I have some, you can use fresh peas that you would, either you can use peas in the pod and you'll have to remove the string and then chop them a little bit to make them more bite-sized. Or you can use, I'm doing it the easy way, I'm using frozen peas, but you can use frozen peas such as we have here. And these are the smaller size peas, just because I like all peas, but I just feel in a salad it's a little bit nicer visually to have these really small peas. So that's what I chose. And then we're going to use cilantro. So as I mentioned with cilantro, you can treat it like a bouquet, put it in your fridge, tint it. It's good for quite some time. And then I first pluck off the leaves of the cilantro, and then I'm going to go ahead, I rinse them, and then you just saw, I just squeeze them dry. I think this is the easiest way to make sure that they're not too watery, is I just hand squeeze them till they're dry. Then I can chop them more easily, because then it's not making such a mess when I chop them. And now we have our minced cilantro, so we're going to go ahead and add this. Now I know that some people are not keen on cilantro. I completely get it, because I used to be one of those people. I used to really hate it. And it turns out that there is a genetic reason for that. Some people perceive cilantro as tasting like soap. That's how I used to perceive it. Then I went to Costa Rica to learn Spanish, and I had to eat cilantro with every meal, and now I love it. So there's also something to be said for, eventually you might wind up liking cilantro if you keep trying it, but I understand it's not everyone's favorite. If you're not a cilantro fan, I would instead suggest doing parsley in this recipe. So I would just like to give that little tip, but maybe you would like to try it though. Maybe you would find that you might like it more these days. So that is our ingredients for the zoodle part. We have those veggies going over there, and now I'm going to do the sauce, or if you want to call it the dressing. So this is a really easy but very savory sauce that you can use, and even though we're putting it with raw vegetables, you could just as easily do it with chicken, really good with chicken actually, or you could do it with regular pasta. You could actually be really good with shrimp. So the sauce is very versatile. So the sauce is going to have a little bit of garlic, and the nice thing about the sauce is we're going to be using coconut milk, so it's going to be nice and creamy, but it is not dairy, and although I love dairy, the two nice things, if it's not dairy, and I'm using a garlic press to make my, instead of mincing my garlic, I think it's easier and quicker to use a garlic press, so sometimes I cheat with that. But the nice thing about using coconut milk, which I've already taken out of the can here, is that for people who can't eat dairy, they can do coconut generally. And also, if you're going to be serving this at a gathering, then since it's coconut, it's a lot more, it's very shelf stable, so you don't have to worry about it spoiling. So that's the other really nice thing about using coconut. So I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of this. Now ideally, if you're making something with coconut, which I must be upfront and tell you, this is not my most ideal use of coconut time, because coconut under about 77 or 76 degrees, coconut milk separates. So you wind up with, and you can see it here, you wind up with kind of the clumpy part of the coconut and then the more watery part of the coconut. They don't like to really go together very well sometimes if it's underneath 76, 77 degrees. So if you're making this during a really hot time of year and you don't have the air conditioning on, when you first open that can of coconut, it'll be nice and homogeneous. But if it's any cooler than 76 degrees, then you're going to have to basically whisk it really hard to get it to become a smooth milk. Or the better way to do it that I usually do is with a blender. So you can just scoop the coconut into the blender, and you'll have to be careful because you'll see a hunk of the coconut will come out and then the water will come out. And it can be kind of messy, so just be aware of that. So you just spoon out the thicker part into the blender, and then let the rest of the water pour into the blender, and then blend it. And then you'll have a nice, perfectly smooth coconut milk. You can pop it into the refrigerator, and it will not separate. Once you blend it, and then you refrigerate it, it will not separate. It's like peanut butter. When it's at, shelf temperature, the peanut butter tends to be separating a lot, but, natural peanut butter, which is the oil separates a little bit, the peanut oil. But once you have stirred it and gotten it nice and smooth, then you put it in the refrigerator, and it's going to be fine. It will not separate. So it's the same thing once you blend your coconut milk. So we're going to do some peanut butter, which I chose creamy. I usually choose crunchy because I like crunchy, but If you want to put it in a sauce, kind of better to choose creamy. So always look for peanut butter that just has either 1 or 2 ingredients, either peanuts or peanuts and salt. In this case, it's peanuts and salt. But beware, because a lot of commercial brands of peanut butter tend to have a lot more than just peanuts in them. The kinds that tell you, oh, this won't separate. Well, that's because they typically have something added to it, you know, a lesser quality oil added to it, or an emulsifier, or sugar. A lot of commercial peanut butters have sugar added to them, and I prefer to just have peanuts, or peanuts and salt. We're also going to be using tamari. So tamari is basically soy sauce, but made without wheat. So if you have any gluten-free people in your life, this is the answer to soy sauce dilemma. I think it actually tastes better as well because it's just the fermented soy flavor, nothing else. So I prefer to use tamari. I'm actually a gluten-free person anyway, but honestly, even if I weren't, I prefer the flavor of tamari. So that's what this is. So it's, I think, a more, I don't know, richer, nuanced version of soy sauce. And if you like, you can use reduced sodium. And then we have ginger. We're going to use a little bit of powdered ginger. The recipe has exact measurements. If you want to see the exact measurements, I'm kind of eyeballing it here. I am a ginger fan, but I'm also mindful that I just purchased this. It's a brand new jar, which means it's going to be quite strong. So I'm not going to use as much as I would if it were, you know, if I had opened it and it had been sitting around for a little bit. Because I can tell from the aroma it's very, very gingery, so I don't want to use too much. That's a good way to tell your spices, is if it's just, you open it and it kind of hits you upside the nose, then you know, okay, that's pretty flavorful. And then we're also going to use lime juice. Now with it, oh, I should show you before I cut it up. So I tried to get, you see that's a little light green part there, because contrary to popular belief, ripe limes are less green. So the more green the lime is, the less ripe it is, which means the less juicy it is. The more juicy, the more ripe the lime, the more yellowish it is. So whenever I look for limes, I always look for at least the most yellowy lime I can get, not a dark green lime. And then also when I'm looking for them, I squeeze them to see how juicy they are, because you want maximum juice in your limes. This is only a kind, this is not as ripe as I would have liked, but when I was at the market looking, this was the most yellowy, softest lime I could find. Obviously, you don't want to get it if you squeeze it and your finger goes into it. Don't get that when it's too ripe. They can, of course, become too ripe, but you do want as ripe as possible. So that is going to be our lime segment. And this, you know, again, you do have exact amounts provided in your recipe, but this is also a bit of a kind of eyeball it. You know, you don't want it to be, you want it to be fairly thick. I'm going to add more coconut milk because I feel like it's too thin right now, so I'm going to add more coconut milk. Because with the addition of the lime and the tamari, you know, those two ingredients both make it thinner, whereas the coconut milk and the peanut butter make it thicker. So I am going to amp up those two ingredients a bit. And, you know, these are very umami-rich ingredients, especially the tamari. And umami actually, we have the 4 tastes. We have sweet, bitter, salty, sour. But umami is known as the 5th taste, and it's that sense of just really savoriness. So it's the kind of, you know, I can't eat just one type of thing. I can't put it down. That's what, it's a Japanese term, but that's what it refers to, is that umami-ness of foods. And so when you think about deeply savory foods, things like tomato-based foods, aged cheeses like Parmesan or an aged manchego, fermented soy products have that aspect to them. So natto or tamari or miso is good that way. You know, so different foods have that very savory umami. Mushrooms, big source of umami. So a lot of times you'll see chefs recommending, especially if people are not eating as much meat, if they're trying to downscale on that a bit, but they want that kind of meaty, kind of savory, super savory flavor, that's when you see a lot of chefs saying, okay, we'll add some umami to it because that'll really amp up that aspect. So that's what we're doing here with this recipe. But like I said, you could, I'm going to add a little bit more tamari, speaking of umami. But like I said, you could definitely use this for chicken or shrimp, or you can just stick with your basic veggies. So now I'm going to go ahead and toss all of this. So I have my zoodles and my carrots and my peas. And I brought a spatula because my whole motto is waste not, want not. So I'm a person, I have a lot of spatulas. I'm a big believer in spatulas. I'm going to go ahead and get every last bit of sauce into here. And this sauce, you know, you can make the sauce on its own too, and then just you can have this on hand and then use it with various things. So as you can see, this is a really easy recipe to make. It just takes a little bit of cutting things up, a little bit of whisking the sauce together. And you can make this, you know, hours in advance if you wanted to, that's fine, or the morning of if you're having some people over. And that's it. And I think it has a nice visual appeal because we have our round peas, we have our zoodly long thin noodles, we have the cut up the pepper and the carrot. You know, as you can see, it's very pretty. It's a very colorful dish to make, and I think people don't need to know how easy it is. So this is our summertime zoodles dish.